Welcome to a recording of the President's Podcast, featuring the president of Medgar College, Dr. Rudy Crew. Today, Dr. Crew is spending time with former President of South Africa, Kgalema Motlanthe. They discuss shared struggles in Africa and the United States for liberation and access to education.
Mr. President, thank you very much for coming to our college, and I cannot tell you how excited we were in anticipation of your visit. Tell us what brings you here.
Well, I've been invited by the Achebe Foundation to give a lecture tomorrow at City College on the 60th anniversary of Professor Chinua Achebe's seminal novel Things Fall Apart, which was first published in 1958. And so I welcome the fact that, and I really feel privileged and honored that I was invited also to come and have conversation here at Medgar College. He's someone that, together with Martin Luther King Jr., were an inspiration to us in the dark days of apartheid in South Africa. And so I really feel honored and privileged to even just step on this hallowed ground.
Well, you grace us with your presence.
Thank
you. Really do. It's an honor to have you here. So as you've seen the changes over time in South Africa and the governmental changes, the societal changes, the cultural changes, do you see those changes happening for African Americans here in this country, or do you see a lot of that as having impediments at this point?
Well, I actually do see the same kind of positive changes happening for Afro Americans here in America, because firstly, the education levels are an equalizer in a sense. And so, short of legislating for preserved responsibilities for certain sections of the American population, I don't see how the artificial glass ceilings can be maintained.
Right.
Yes. I think that in itself will bring about even more positive changes.
I wonder sometimes whether or not the evolution that South Africa has gone through and the work that you did as president, I wonder whether or not that evolution is something that we're seeing worldwide, not just necessarily in Africa, but certainly here in the United States. But what about, are you seeing it in other nations? Are you seeing it in China, for example? Are you seeing the evolution take place in India?
Yes, the globally speaking, the world is at a point where there's great advances in terms of technological know-how, and boundaries have been pushed outwardly. And yet, even with the capacity to produce plenty or enough to take care of
The world.
Right. The distribution is highly skewed.
Right.
Such that it creates a yawning gap between those who are left behind, and therefore actually majority of them don't even know where the next meal is going to come from.
Right.
And a handful of people, small percentage, control and appropriate unto themselves society's wealth. And I think the challenge going forward is how society will be able to create permanent capital, both human and material, because regardless of how we structure ourselves, we do need permanent capital. By permanent capital, I mean if you take the Norwegian model of how they utilize revenue from accruing from sales of oil to create a sovereign fund. That's the kind of thing that we need globally, so that with institutions in place, we can ensure that every human being is given a chance to partake meaningfully in global affairs in a manner which enhances and improves the quality of lives of ordinary people.
In a little while, you're going to have a chance to meet some of the students and members of the faculty here. The college has been, I think as I mentioned to you, quite serious about this question of how do we redistribute intellectual wealth? How do we create capital in communities that heretofore didn't really ever think of having the kind of capital that you're talking about now? Can you think through any of the experiences that you've had in South Africa and point up ways by which you see education as playing a really important role in helping to produce that capital?
Yes, we have a unique situation in the sense that apartheid introduced 7 different systems of education.
7 different systems
of education. There was education for white folk, an education for Indian or children of Indian descent, an education for what in South Africa the descendants of slaves from Malaysia, India, Indonesia, who were brought into South Africa in the 1600s, are called colours. That's how apartheid, graded and classified the population. And
this was during the Ian Smith era?
No.
Before or forever?
From 1948.
So just
1948, thereabouts.
Okay.
And so the African natives, the Bantu people, were the bottom of the rung, and in all phases of life. And so a special system of basic education was introduced in 1953. Basically, when Dr. Verwoerd, who was the architect of that system, motivated for it in Parliament, he said there's no point in teaching the African child mathematics and natural sciences because they'll have no use for it in life. And so how he went about it was to take over teacher training colleges, which up to that point were under missionaries. So you had religious denominations having their own schools and training colleges and so on. And so he took over as government and created a new cohort of teachers who were taught to be very poorly trained in teaching mathematics and science. And that has affected the
equilibrium.
The equilibrium in terms of,
balance.
Critical skills, like engineering.
Who got what?
Yeah.
Who got a very good education, who
That's
didn't get a very good education.
That's right.
So I see parallels, though, between that and the way education is distributed in this country as well, right? I mean, there are good schools and then there are really bad schools, and the bad schools typically are in places where the society has really relegated education to be less of a value, if you will, to certain people, because as you said earlier, they're not likely to go on, it's not likely to benefit their lives in the long term. Are there things that turn that conundrum, turn that problem around in South Africa that you see now, really taking root and being able to build stronger communities within South Africa, educationally?
Well, firstly, the basic education system, mainly in the African communities, does not prepare students to participate in the economy, because it was structured with the aim of making them less productive in the economy.
A permanent underclass.
That's right.
Right.
Now, because we're all aware of the nub of this problem, so there's been some interventions, like corporate companies adopting schools and offering extra classes, which improves the results of the students in those schools. But the systemic problem still remains in place. And you see it when students get to tertiary. Yes, that's where you see it, because just to illustrate the point, the report of the Statistician General indicates that at entry level, almost 96 to 98% enrollment takes place of children who are meant to enter schooling at that age.
Right.
And he says if you track that cohort of students or learners over a 12-year period, which is the point at which they are meant to matriculate, only out of the 96%, only 22% go through grade 12, which means something in the order of 74%
they fell out. They
fall
dropped
out
Right.
of the system. And unfortunately, the vocational and artisanal training colleges aren't doing that great in terms of absorbing them and giving them requisite skills. And so the economy suffers as a result of that.
Or you end up having to create a whole new working class of people by virtue of having people immigrate.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. In fact, we have almost upward of 2 million Zimbabweans who have better education, basic education, who come to South Africa. And whether it's in the restaurants or in the financial services sector, the majority of blacks are Zimbabweans.
Right. So I don't want to take up a lot more of your time, but this is actually pretty interesting to me. I want to just switch to the blend of education and the economy for a moment, right? So with what you just said, I guess it shouldn't be a surprise that you have a high rate of unemployment for young people who are not well educated and for whom there is no job in the economy.
That's right.
So what are the things you see that can turn that around in South Africa?
Well, one of the things that I think would be of great help to our schooling system in South Africa is to introduce music as a subject.
Say more.
In basic education, so that the learners can, because music has two advantages. It introduces discipline and the culture of practice. Mathematics is also about solving problems.
Right.
So it's practice.
Right.
and music would help in that regard. Music is only offered in private schools, top class private schools. The rest, there's no, music as a subject.
Right.
That's the first thing that I think we need to try and introduce. Second thing is to open teacher training colleges and ensure that we take a long-term view that in the next 10 to 15 years we would have trained sufficient teachers, a new cohort of teachers who would be strong in teaching mathematics and science, as well as, of course, the humanities. To do that, we also have to ensure that early education centers are staffed by trained people.
Right.
In the African communities now, these ECD centers are really headed by big-hearted, loving, motherly,
Wonderful people, but they
wonderful
don't know,
people, but they don't
right,
have
right.
the skills
Right.
to identify the latent talent
Right.
of these toddlers,
Right.
so that they can be channeled into the correct stream. At the moment, the system tries to produce an academic out of every student, yes, and it isn't working for us. Yeah. Hence, the percentages I was alluding to.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Right. You know, we struggle worldwide. We struggle with this question of who's educable and who's not.
Yeah.
Who's smart enough to go to college, who's not.
And who can use their hands?
Who can use their hands versus their head.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, as you think about, about presiding over an entire nation as president, how hard was it to begin to change the cultural mindset of people who believe that there are some people who are simply not educable?
Well, firstly, the parents, in the African communities, believe that their children stand a better chance in life if they are fluent and eloquent in English. And so there's no mother tongue training at the
Elementary,
preschool level,
right.
Because if children at that level play games
Right.
in their
Right.
language
Day-to-day.
that they understand
Right.
better,
Right.
it helps them to get an understanding of the subject matter. But parents still have reservations about that. They take it from themselves that because I as a parent am not that fluent in English. My station in life is determined by that, and therefore I'm going to do everything in my power to ensure that my children have a better chance, so that we don't transmit, the poverty levels from one generation to the other.
Right.
And they literally pay
Thousands of dollars.
thousands and thousands
Right,
of dollars
right, right.
to get their children into what they regard as better schools. And so the mindset is determined by that.
Right.
And you, of course, if you're head of state, you've got to appreciate that factor. And try and accommodate it. That there's an advantage in getting young ones to be taught in mother tongue as well as in English.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Because then that kind of endeavor is supported by the parents as well.
Right. Right. I just want to ask one other question about the economy, just because it's an area that I'm interested in personally. When the employment picture um, in South Africa, when it shows signs of really, putting more people to work, and more people are being able to be not just gainfully employed, but they're also making enough money to buy new homes and buy cars and stimulate the economy through buying. Does the government at some point in time see the connection between economic development and educational development? Do they really ostensibly see the fact that the more people who are literate, the more people that have strong math skills, the more people that took classes in music and therefore are eligible to start doing new and different things that require rhythm and algorithms and that sort of thing, does the government look at that and say, hey, we should now start to make a deeper investment in education? Or do they just simply say that's just the luck of the draw, and we'll just continue the old system the way that it worked?
Well, the government is well aware that education is the best equalizer, and given all the historical disadvantages, accumulated disadvantages of being discriminated against. So the biggest budget allocation goes towards education.
The biggest governmental allocation?
Budget allocation goes to education. The disadvantage is that the bulk of it goes towards salaries. The bulk of it
goes
to
teacher salaries.
That's right. That's the disadvantage. So therefore, it leaves very little to either
change programs,
use
new technologies,
and expand the facilities and so on. Students who come from very poor backgrounds have been demanding that education at tertiary level should be free, and government 2 years ago gave in and said, well, on merit, if you pass, we will make sure that you get funding.
Right.
And the difficulty with that is we're not putting money in areas that would ensure that these students, if they register for a 4-year degree, they will complete it within 4 years. So you have students who
not 6 or 8. Right.
First year and so on, they're adjusting and adapting, and so a 4-year program will be completed after 6 years, and so there's a bulge of because the every year there's a fresh intake from those who come from high school, and because the basic education doesn't prepare them that well, they spend the first year really don't.
It's remarkably like our system.
Not knowing, why they are there.
Right.
So there are those kinds of weaknesses in our system, and I still believe that the best solution is to invest in teacher training colleges, so that we can have teachers who are well trained to prepare these students better.
Right.
Yes. And to ensure that when they get into tertiary, they do that within minimum time required.
Well, I don't want to hold you up. I know you've got some very important remarks to be made for our students. I do want to thank you very much for coming to Medgar College.
No, thank you.
It is a real honor to have you here, Mr. President, and to allow for your thinking, your thoughts, the work that in some ways has been part of the work, I guess, that your daughter's book is in the process of coming out with, and so forth. I mean, just the idea of having these more provocative thoughts for our students is enormously powerful, and I thank you very much
Thank you
for coming. It's really an honor
Thank you very
to
much.
have you here, sir. Thank you so much.
You've been watching an episode of the President's Podcast with Dr. Rudy Crew. Please join us for our next episode.